Hi everybody, and welcome to the first in the series of the ACE Report video and blog series. I'm your host, Nick Lawrence, and I'm here with Dr. Lou Cuthbert from ACE, the Alliance for a Clean Environment. We're very excited about our new series that you'll be able to watch and listen to and read. And we'd like to send you right to our website at www.acereport.org. Dr. Cuthbert, give us a little overview of this new series that you've started.
Be happy to, Nick. This new series is going to be looking at a very important topic: how to minimize chaos and reduce radiation exposure by improving the Limerick nuclear plant's fatally flawed and inadequate emergency and evacuation plans. That's a big title, and we're going to be looking at a number of topics in this series that we think should serve as a wake-up call for people in the greater Philadelphia region. Obviously, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is supposed to regulate Limerick nuclear plant and protect human health and safety. And during this series, this special video and blog series, we're going to be providing a lot of information, Nick, that would suggest that they're not doing the job they should be doing. So we're going to be looking at a series of problems and flaws with Limerick's plans and the potential for an evacuation scenario here. This is the first, or part one, of this video blog series, and this one's going to talk specifically about how the NRC has gone the wrong way. They've pared things down. In subsequent reports, we're going to be looking at things like calls for notification and expanding evacuation zones, truth and consequences of radiation exposures from Limerick and other nuclear plant accidents, financial injustice as a major topic to the public, fatal flaws specifically in the Limerick plans and evacuation scenario, and then a major regional campaign for the greater Philadelphia area to call for immediate notification and expanded evacuation and ingestion pathway zones.
So with this first of this series, what is the problem that we want to address in this particular show?
In this particular report, Nick, we want to zero in on the fact that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission basically has gone the wrong way. In spite of what we know about Fukushima and that whole experience, in 2012, the NRC inexplicably just decided to pare down requirements, procedures for evacuation plans and for all nuclear plants, including the one here in Limerick, Pennsylvania.
I mean, it seems in a sense a bit counterintuitive, as we say today, that after an accident or a tragedy like Fukushima or any of the other accidents in the past, that they would go the exact opposite of what they should be doing. Shouldn't that have been expanded? The evacuation procedure should have been expanded rather than pared back.
Right, exactly. During the Fukushima disaster in 2011, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in fact, called for a 50-mile evacuation zone for all U.S. citizens who were in Japan at that time. And ACE and lots of other people immediately urged the NRC to apply that same standard of safety and protection here in the United States. And in terms of the greater Philadelphia region, we're talking about Limerick nuclear plant. We called for an immediate change from a 10-mile evacuation zone to a 50-mile evacuation zone. If it was good enough to be considered protective in Japan for U.S. citizens, we think everybody living in the greater Philadelphia region deserves the same protection.
So what are those things that they actually have attempted to do that we need to focus on in this particular report? What have they tried to do to either hide from us the actual things that need to be done?
Well, several things happened here. I mean, it took a couple of decades since the TMI event, through Chernobyl and Fukushima, for us to get some sense of the magnitude of what a problem could look like. The NRC decided that they were not going to be forthcoming, so literally what they decided to do with their paring down and reductions was they deceived the public, number one. They NRC actually denied radiation risks and harms in several different ways. So they've misled the public in many ways. They've weakened emergency rules, and they failed to expand emergency zones. Probably the most obvious and immediate thing that people can look at and say, what could you possibly have been thinking? Why did you not expand evacuation zones?
So whatever was in place before, they have new rules now. So what are the new rules that have been scaled back that people can understand where it used to be versus where it is now?
This is not good news, and this is pretty well documented in a couple of different places through a number of reporters, including the Associated Press. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But basically what the NRC has done is they've required fewer exercises, so fewer actual exercises for major radiation accidents. They've recommended that fewer people evacuate right away, Nick.
Fewer people are
fewer
so they're
people.
willing to trade off certain lives.
Yeah, the collateral damage numbers apparently are larger than they were before. And there's a third thing. They allow emergency drills to be conducted without practicing for radiation releases. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever to most observers. A lot of people who have responded to this set of rules have described them as downright bizarre.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of changing what 50 miles was called for, so they have 10-mile limit, right? So, I mean, that in itself is a form of insanity. There are no walls to radiation. Radiation just goes where it needs to go.
Oh,
but it
certainly
doesn't say
does.
it's not going to stop at the 10-mile and 1 foot limit, is it?
Not in a heartbeat.
Right.
It's just going to keep on going. A couple of other things that I think are really egregious here, at least in my analysis, and that is that the NRC actually tried to hide this information. They announced revisions to pare this down, make things weaker, more diluted, less protective. December 23rd, 2011. I mean, that's right in the middle of the holiday season, you know, whether you're celebrating Christmas or Hanukkah or any other, you know, major festive event, including New Year. So peak of the holiday season. Make the announcement, and we attempted to find announcements, public advertisements. They were very few and far between, and both the NRC and FEMA web archive showed no news releases at that time, which we found pretty damning, to be quite frank here. It was not until May of 2012 that the public had full disclosure on this, and that's because the Associated Press decided to investigate and report. And thank goodness for the Associated Press. A reporter by the name of Jeff Don did a pretty significant analysis and report in May of 2012 called Evacuation Plans and Emergency Drills Pared Down Near Nuclear Plants. And that information is available, you know, on AP archives. It was also picked up and reported by the Pottstown Mercury May 20th of 2012. So there's, you know, there are articles, and, you know, this is just one example, Nick, of the kind of work that was done. It's pretty detailed analysis. Jeff Don, Associated Press, for anybody who wants to follow up on this. And in addition to the videos in this series, Nick, we're going to be posting these with blogs that include either links to or actual copies of source documents. So anybody that's watching this video, or any of the videos in this series, can actually look at the source documents as well.
And I'm thinking that people would want to know. I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm wondering, well, why would they hide those new rules? What's the motivation behind hiding the new rules, and who's actually behind these changes? Do you have an opinion about that? Do you have any backup information as to why would they change the rules to make them weaker than what they were before, when we need more protection rather than less?
Well, the evidence trail, the smoking gun, is pretty clear, and that is that the nuclear industry has their fingerprints all over this, obviously.
Okay.
The nuclear industry essentially gets what they want, and they drive the agenda at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They basically, you know, said, pare this down, you know, spare us, if you will, and public, you know, you're on your own in terms of what happens here. A number of observers, including ACE, have said that the NRC is apparently valuing Exelon's profits over public health and safety. So it's a matter of priorities in terms of who's influencing the NRC.
With the amount of time we have in this particular segment of the series, I'd like you to tell those who are watching our presentation here exactly what we knew in the past, or statements that were made in the past about whether or not evacuation was even necessary.
Yeah, startling to many people when they looked at the record. If you just look, you know, easily track down evidence. You can go back as early as 1980, Nick, and find out that PECO, the original owner of this Limerick nuclear plant, attempted to avoid a number of costs associated with evacuation plans. They were about the bottom line. They were about saving money. There was an article in the Pottstown Mercury, May 28, 1980, Nick, about Limerick hearings where a Philadelphia electric official actually said evacuation plan is unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
Unnecessary. So that's 1980. Then you look at 1983, the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, said on the record in front of the entire country, nuclear evacuation plans are deficient. So the GAO is on record, you know, in the early 1980s saying, you know, these plans are a sham, guys. These are not sufficient. They're not adequate. They're not scientifically based. You know, a lot of this is based on political science, not, you know, physical science. When you're talking about things like 10-mile emergency zones, that's an arbitrary number that was selected primarily to serve the industry. So a number of things have happened early 80s through mid 80s, up through and including what we've learned from Fukushima. There are independent reports, Nick, that have said pretty clearly that the Fukushima disaster was man-made and caused largely as a result of collusion between and among the government, regulators, and TEPCO in Japan, because they just simply ignored and avoided developing and implementing safety requirements.
So, because we have shortened time in what we do, people are always looking for some type of solution, or so now we know what the problem is. What can people actually do about this?
Well, I think people need to internalize this information from part one of this series, Nick, and understand that these new pared down NRC nuclear rules for evacuation are not protective, and they're not acceptable. I mean, we need to say as citizens, as residents of the greater Philadelphia region and the entire country, you know, this just is not acceptable. The NRC is completely off base here. You know, they've made a really nasty wrong turn, and it's up to us. I mean, it's obvious that the NRC is not going to protect us. It's up to us to work to change these things before there's a meltdown in the United States. Now, there are two things I think that we can say pretty clearly, you know, as part of this initial presentation. The first thing is we need to reduce exposure risks in this country. So we need immediate, independent notification. And we'll talk about these pieces of the solution throughout this series. But we need immediate, independent notification of a problem, because the industry is not going to tell us. Their history is just atrocious. Right. We need to expand the evacuation zone from 10 to 50 miles. That's part two of this.
That seems like that would be a given.
Well, it should be, but obviously it hasn't been to this point. So expand this zone from 10 to 50 miles, and that has a lot of implications, which we'll talk about throughout this series. And the third piece is we need to expand what's known as the ingestion pathway zone from 50 to 100 miles. Now, that's a term that a lot of people are not familiar with, ingestion pathway zone.
I think that's something we're going to pick up in our next part of the series. So we're going to talk about the ingestion pathway zone. I think we'll be talking about that. Yeah,
we'll talk about that a couple different times. But basically, that's the bigger radius, the bigger radius around the 50 miles that would include and affect all of the food that's grown in a region. And a lot of that is affected by the radiation. The water that people drink in this part of Pennsylvania, Nick, that includes all of Lancaster County's dairy farms. I mean, we're talking about radioactive contaminated water, food, and milk for 50 miles now, and the experts are saying that really has to be 100 miles.
So in about a minute or so that we have, what's ACE's campaign to try to make this situation better?
Our campaign is to do three things, and it'll be from and through the people and by elected officials. That is immediate, independent notification of radiation exposure in the event of a problem at Limerick Nuclear Plant. Number two, expand the emergency evacuation zone, or the planning zone, the EPZ, the 10-mile circle that people are familiar with, and take that out to 50, and also to expand the ingestion pathway zone to include all the food and water and milk supplies that people are going to rely on in the event of a disaster to 100 miles.
So folks, as you're watching this, I want to thank you for joining us today. We hope that the report and the accompanying blog posting, you want to go to www.acereport.org, has been instructive for you. And in part two of our 6-part series, we'll be discussing the national campaign for expanded evacuation and ingested pathway zones that is currently underway. Thanks for watching us. This is Nick Lawrence.